A virgin millionaire never touched a woman until he hired a new private chef. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The notification sound on her phone always made Heloisa Grant's heart skip, never knowing if it would bring salvation or another small defeat. She wiped flour-covered hands on her apron, glancing at the cracked screen, while Alexander hummed softly at the kitchen table, arranging his toy cars in perfect lines. The email subject read, "Private chef position, immediate start, $4,500 a week." Her breath caught, $4,500 in 1 week. That was more than she made in 2 months juggling delivery apps, freelance catering gigs, and online cooking classes that barely paid her rent in their cramped Oakland apartment. "Mommy, the red car doesn't like being touched by the blue one," Alexander said without looking up, his small fingers precise as he adjusted the spacing between vehicles. "I know, baby. The red car needs its space," she replied automatically, her eyes scanning the email. Asher Lawn, corporate attorney, Pacific Heights mansion, dietary restrictions, none. Special requirements, silence during meal preparation and service. Silence. She almost laughed. In their world, silence was a luxury they couldn't afford. Between Alexander's stimming sounds, her constant phone calls with clients, and the neighbor's dog that barked every morning at 6:30 sharp. The next morning, Heloisa stood before the imposing steel gates of 2847 Broadway Street, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed the intercom button. Alexander gripped her free hand, his SpongeBob backpack weighing heavily on his small shoulders. "Yes?" The voice was clipped, professional. "Heloisa Grant, I'm here for the chef position interview." The gates opened silently. The mansion was everything she'd expected and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors that clicked under her worn sneakers, and an overwhelming sense of space that made her feel smaller than she already was. Alexander pressed closer to her side, overwhelmed by the echoing footsteps. "Ms. Grant." She turned toward the voice and forgot how to breathe. Asher Lawn stood at the top of a curved staircase, descending with the controlled precision of someone who measured every movement. Tall, with dark hair perfectly styled and wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car, he looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate magazine. But it was his eyes that stopped her, grey, intense, and carrying a weight that seemed at odds with his polished exterior. "Mr. Lawn," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. His gaze dropped to Alexander, who had begun his subtle rocking motion, a sign he was processing the new environment. For a moment something flickered across Asher's face, not irritation as she'd expected, but curiosity. "The position requires discretion and punctuality," he said, his attention returning to her. "No phone calls during work hours, no music, no unnecessary conversation." "I understand. Do you?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Because most people say they understand silence until they're actually required to maintain it." Heloisa felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. "Mr. Lawn, I've spent the last 5 years learning that sometimes the most important conversations happen without words at all." Something shifted in his expression, so brief she might have imagined it. "The kitchen is this way." He turned without waiting for a response. As they walked through the spotless hallways, Alexander's hand slipped from hers, his attention caught by the geometric patterns in the marble floor. She watched nervously as he knelt down, tracing the lines with his finger. "Alexander," she whispered, "we need to—" "Let him," Asher said quietly, stopping to observe. "The pattern is Carrara marble, imported from Italy. The veining follows a mathematical sequence." Alexander looked up at him with wide eyes. "It's beautiful." For the first time since they'd arrived, Asher's rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, it is." In the kitchen, a chef's dream with professional-grade equipment and endless counter space, Asher outlined her responsibilities with military precision. Breakfast at 7 sharp, lunch at noon, dinner at 6:30, no deviations. "Can you handle these requirements?" he asked. Heloisa looked around the kitchen, then at Alexander, who was now sitting quietly by the window, watching birds in the garden. She thought about the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table, the waiting list for Alexander's therapy, the dreams she'd put on hold. "Yes," she said, "I can handle it." Asher studied her face for a long moment. "We'll see." As he turned to leave, Alexander spoke up unexpectedly. "Mr. Asher, do you like pancakes?" Asher paused at the doorway, his back still turned. When he finally looked over his shoulder, his expression was unreadable. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I've never had them made with love." And in that moment, Heloisa realized this job would change everything, though she had no idea how much. She never imagined that silence could feel so loud. Heloisa arrived at the mansion at 6:15 a.m., her hands still shaking from the 3 cups of coffee she'd needed to function after Alexander's restless night. He'd had nightmares about the big house with too many echoes, and she'd spent most of the evening reassuring him that the nice man with the sad eyes wouldn't hurt them. The kitchen felt different in the early morning light, less intimidating, more like a sanctuary waiting to come alive. She tied her hair back, washed her hands, and began the ritual that had always calmed her: cooking pancakes. Alexander had asked about pancakes, and something in Asher's response had haunted her all night. "I've never had them made with love." What kind of life had this man lived that love was absent from something as simple as breakfast? She mixed the batter by hand, the way her grandmother had taught her, folding the ingredients with gentle strokes instead of aggressive whisking. Love was in the patience, Grandma Rose used to say. Love was in not rushing. "You're early." The voice made her jump, batter splattering across the pristine marble counter. Asher stood in the doorway, fully dressed in a charcoal suit despite the early hour, his tie perfectly knotted, but his hair was slightly mussed, and there were shadows under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "I wanted to get familiar with the equipment," she said, quickly wiping up the mess. "I hope that's okay." He nodded curtly, moving to the coffee machine with mechanical precision. As it hummed to life, filling the silence between them, Heloisa noticed how he stood, perfectly straight but with a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. "Alexander's not with you today." The question surprised her. She'd expected him to be relieved by her son's absence, not curious. "He's at my neighbor's. She watches him sometimes when I work early shifts." She poured the first pancake into the heated pan, watching it bubble and form. "He wanted to come. He keeps talking about the marble patterns man." Something flickered across Asher's face. Was it amusement? Before she could analyze it further, he'd turned back to his coffee. "I have dietary requirements I didn't mention yesterday," he said to the window. "Okay, what kind of restrictions?" He paused, his knuckles white around the coffee mug. "I don't like unexpected flavors, or textures that change. Everything needs to be predictable." Heloisa flipped the pancake, her movements gentle despite the revelation. Control. This man needed control the way Alexander needed routine, the way she needed hope. "What about comfort?" she asked quietly. "Do you like foods that make you feel safe?" The question hung in the air between them like morning mist. Asher turned from the window, studying her with those intense gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "I don't remember the last time food made me feel anything," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Her heart clenched. She slid the golden pancake onto a plate, added a small pat of butter that melted immediately, and drizzled just a touch of maple syrup. Not too much, nothing overwhelming. "Try this," she said, placing it in front of him. He stared at the plate, as if it might bite him. "It's just breakfast, Ms. Grant." "No," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "It's not. It's someone caring enough to get up early, to choose ingredients thoughtfully, to cook something just for you. That's not just breakfast. That's what love looks like when it's made of flour and eggs." Asher picked up the fork with the same caution he might use to handle a dangerous legal document. He cut a small piece, brought it to his mouth, and chewed slowly. The change in his expression was subtle, a slight widening of his eyes, a barely perceptible softening of his jaw. He took another bite, then another, eating with the focused attention he probably gave to million-dollar contracts. He struggled for words. "Different. Different how?" "Warm. Not just temperature warm, but—" He gestured helplessly. "I can taste that someone cared about making it." Heloisa felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had recognized her care? When was the last time it had mattered this much? Her phone buzzed against the counter. A text from her neighbor. "Alexander's asking when you're coming home. Says the marble patterns man might be lonely." She showed Asher the message, watching his face carefully. "He's worried about you. He doesn't even know me." Kids like Alexander see things differently. They see feelings before faces, emotions before expectations. She began cleaning up, her movements efficient, but not rushed. "He thinks you're lonely, because you are." The words hung between them, too honest and too true. Asher finished the last bite of pancake, set down his fork with the same precision he did everything else, and looked at her directly. "Ms. Grant?" "Yes?" "Tomorrow morning. Could you make 2 pancakes? Her breath caught. 2? 1 for Alexander. If he'd like to come early sometimes, before school. The kindness in his voice, hesitant and unpracticed, nearly undid her. This man who lived in silence and control was making space for a 5-year-old boy who saw marble patterns as beautiful and lonely hearts as worth healing. He would love that, she whispered. Asher nodded once, straightened his tie, and moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused. Miss Grant, the pancake was... He searched for the right word. Perfect. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Heloisa pressed her hands to her chest, feeling her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. This job was definitely going to change everything. The marble patterns didn't look the same when you had someone to share them with. Alexander knelt on the pristine floor of Asher's foyer, his small finger tracing the veining in the stone, while Heloisa prepared breakfast in the kitchen. It was their 3rd morning together, and already a rhythm had formed, one that none of them had expected. The lines go like rivers, Alexander said softly, his voice carrying in the quiet mansion, but rivers that forgot how to move. From the kitchen doorway, Asher watched the boy with an expression Heloisa couldn't quite read. He'd been doing that more often, lingering, observing, as if trying to decode something he'd never encountered before. Alexander, she called gently, come wash your hands. Breakfast is ready. But instead of running to her as usual, Alexander looked up at Asher with those impossibly earnest 5-year-old eyes. Mr. Asher, do you want to see how the patterns connect? They make a story. Heloisa held her breath. In the past 3 days, she'd watched Asher exist in his controlled bubble, precise, distant, safe. But Alexander had a way of asking questions that adults had forgotten how to answer. To her amazement, Asher lowered himself to the floor, his expensive suit be damned, and crouched beside her son. Show me, he said simply. Alexander's face lit up like Christmas morning. See? This line starts here, and it goes all the way to that wall, but it gets interrupted by this dark spot. That's where the story gets sad, but then his finger moved delicately across the marble. It starts again over here, and it's even prettier because it learned how to go around the sad part. Asher stared at the patterns with new eyes, seeing what the child saw, not just expensive Italian marble, but narrative etched in stone. You think the marble tells stories? Asher asked. Everything tells stories, Alexander replied matter-of-factly. Even people, especially people. Your story is in your eyes, Mr. Asher. It's a little broken, but it's trying to fix itself. The words hit the kitchen like a thunderclap. Heloisa nearly dropped the spatula, and Asher went completely still, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. Alexander, she said quickly, let's not... It's okay, Asher said quietly, never taking his eyes off the boy. He's not wrong. The vulnerability in his voice made her chest tight. This man who commanded courtrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals was undone by the honest observation of a 5-year-old. They ate breakfast together at the kitchen island, another first. Alexander chatted about school, about his friend Marcus who collected bottle caps, about the pigeon he'd named Gerald who lived outside their apartment window. Asher listened with the same intensity he probably gave to legal briefs, asking questions that showed he was genuinely hearing every word. Do you have friends, Mr. Asher? Alexander asked, syrup sticky on his chin. I have colleagues, Asher replied carefully. That's not the same thing. Alexander's wisdom was delivered with the casualness of discussing the weather. Friends are people who like your broken parts too. Heloisa felt her heart stop. How did her son understand these things? How did he see so clearly what adults spent years learning to hide? Asher set down his fork, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. I don't think I know how to have friends, Alexander. It's easy, Alexander said, reaching over to pat Asher's hand with his small, sticky one. You just have to stop being scared of being happy. The silence that followed was deafening. Asher stared at the small hand on his, and for a moment, Heloisa thought she saw his eyes glisten. I should go, Asher said abruptly, standing so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. I have court at 9, but as he headed for the door, Alexander called after him. Mr. Asher, can I tell you a secret? Asher paused, his back to them. Sometimes when I'm scared, I count things, like marble patterns or birds or the freckles on Mummy's nose. It helps me remember that even when things feel too big, there are still small, good things everywhere. Asher turned slowly, his composure cracking like ice in spring. What do you count when you're scared? Alexander asked. The question hung in the air, simple and profound. Asher looked at Alexander, then at Heloisa, then back at the marble floor where they'd traced stories together. "I don't," he admitted. "I just stop feeling anything." "That sounds lonely," Alexander said softly. "It is." The admission was barely a whisper, but it filled the entire kitchen. Heloisa felt tears prick her eyes as she watched this powerful man crumble and rebuild himself in the span of a heartbeat. "Well," Alexander said, climbing down from his stool, "now you have us to count, me and Mommy. We're two good things right here." He walked over to Asher, and without asking permission, wrapped his small arms around the man's legs in a fierce hug. For a moment, Asher stood frozen, his hands hovering uncertainly above the boy's head. Then, as if remembering how, he gently placed his hands on Alexander's shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered. When Alexander finally let go, he looked up at Asher with a serious expression. "Tomorrow, can you help me count the marble patterns? I think I missed some yesterday." Asher's smile was small but genuine, the first real smile Heloisa had seen from him. "Yes," he said, "I'd like that very much." As they watched him leave for court, Alexander slipped his hand into his mother's. "Mommy, I think Mr. Asher is starting to remember how to be happy." Heloisa squeezed her son's hand, her heart full of a hope she hadn't felt in years. "I think you might be right, baby. I think you might be right. Some changes happen like earthquakes, but the most important ones happen like morning dew. So quietly you only notice them when everything looks different." Heloisa found the note tucked under the coffee maker on Friday morning, written in Asher's precise handwriting. "Alexander mentioned he likes dinosaurs. There's a package for him in the study. A.L." Her hands trembled as she held the paper. In 2 weeks of working for Asher Lawn, she'd learned that he was a man of few words and even fewer gestures. This small act of thoughtfulness felt monumental. "Mommy, you're smiling funny," Alexander observed from his spot at the kitchen table, where he was arranging his cereal by color, a Friday morning ritual that helped him prepare for the weekend transition. "Am I?" She touched her cheek, surprised to find he was right. "It's your hopeful smile. You only use it when good things might happen." Sometimes her son's perceptiveness stole her breath. How did a 5-year-old read emotions better than most adults? "Well, Mr. Asher left you a surprise in his study." Alexander's eyes went wide. "A surprise? For me? But it's not my birthday. The best surprises don't need birthdays, baby." They found Asher in the study, standing by the window with his usual morning coffee, still in his running clothes, another small change she'd noticed. 2 weeks ago, he'd been fully dressed by 6 a.m. Now he allowed himself the vulnerability of being seen in something casual, unguarded. "Mr. Asher," Alexander's voice was pure joy. "Mommy said you have a surprise." Asher turned, and Heloisa caught something in his expression. Nervousness. When was the last time this man had given someone a gift and cared whether they liked it? "It's on the desk," he said, his voice softer than usual. Alexander's gasp could have powered the entire mansion. On the mahogany desk sat a beautiful wooden puzzle box, but not just any puzzle. It was a 3-dimensional triceratops that could be taken apart and rebuilt, with intricate pieces that fit together like a mechanical dream. It's perfect," Alexander whispered, running his fingers over the smooth wood with the reverence he usually reserved for his marble patterns. "Look, Mommy, all the pieces have numbers. I can put it together in order. I researched toys for children with—" Asher paused, choosing his words carefully. "Children who think differently. The manufacturer said this one helps with spatial reasoning and provides calming, repetitive motion." Heloisa felt her throat tighten. He'd researched. He'd thought about what would specifically help Alexander, not just what might entertain him. "Can I build it now?" Alexander asked, already reaching for the pieces. "Of course," Asher said, "but there's something else." He handed Alexander a smaller box, this one containing a magnifying glass with a built-in LED light. "For examining the marble patterns more closely," Asher explained. "I thought you might discover new stories." Alexander looked between the gifts and Asher with an expression of pure wonder, then launched himself at the man in one of his spontaneous hugs. This time Asher was ready. He caught the boy easily, holding him with a tenderness that made Heloisa's chest ache. "Thank you, Mr. Asher. These are the best gifts ever, because they came from your heart." Over Alexander's head, Asher's eyes met Heloisa's. The gratitude in his gaze was overwhelming, as if he was thanking her for giving him the chance to experience this moment. "You didn't have to," she said quietly when Alexander had settled on the floor with his puzzle. "I wanted to." He paused. watching Alexander sort pieces with methodical precision. "I've never wanted to make someone happy before. It's addictive." The admission hung between them, honest and raw. Heloisa found herself stepping closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "Asher," she said, using his first name for the first time. He looked at her sharply, as if the sound of his name in her voice had surprised him. "You're changing," she continued. "I can see it happening." "Is that good or bad?" The question was asked with the uncertainty of a man who'd spent his life avoiding change, who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten there was a world beyond them. "It's beautiful," she said simply. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching Alexander work. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the gold flecks in Asher's grey eyes, and Heloisa found herself noticing details she'd tried to ignore, the way his hair fell slightly across his forehead when he wasn't being careful, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the fact that when he relaxed, really relaxed, he looked younger, more human. "Mommy, Mr. Asher, look." Alexander held up the partially assembled dinosaur. "I found a pattern in how the pieces connect. Hey, it's like the marble floor, but in wood." "That's incredible, sweetheart," Heloisa said, but her attention was caught by Asher's expression. He was studying Alexander with the intensity of someone trying to memorize a moment, as if afraid it might disappear. "You know," Asher said suddenly, "I have a confession to make." Both Heloisa and Alexander looked at him expectantly. "I bought the wrong coffee maker," he said to Heloisa. "The one in the kitchen makes terrible coffee. But I noticed you know exactly how to make it taste. Right, like comfort." Heloisa blinked. "You want me to teach you?" "I want to learn how you make everything better." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of something deeper. This wasn't just about coffee. It was about connection, about allowing someone else to guide him, about admitting he didn't have all the answers. "Tomorrow morning," she said, her voice slightly husky. "I'll show you tomorrow morning." "It's a date," Asher said, then immediately flushed. "I mean, I know what you meant," she said gently, but inside her heart was racing. Alexander, oblivious to the charged moment between the adults, held up his completed triceratops triumphantly. "Look, he's perfect, and now I can take him apart and build him again whenever I need to think." As they admired Alexander's work, Heloisa felt the shift happening around them, in the room, between them, within her own carefully guarded heart. Change was coming whether she was ready or not, and for the first time in years that thought didn't terrify her. It excited her. There are moments when the space between two people becomes electric, charged with all the words they're not saying. Heloisa arrived early Saturday morning to find Asher already in the kitchen, standing uncertainly by the coffee machine like a man who'd forgotten how to operate something he used every day. He'd traded his usual immaculate suits for dark jeans and a simple grey sweater that made his eyes look like storm clouds, and the casual look did dangerous things to her pulse. "You came," he said, as if he'd half expected her to change her mind. "I promised." She set her purse down, hyper-aware of how different everything felt without Alexander's cheerful chatter filling the silence. "Where is Alexander?" "Still sleeping. I thought..." He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up in a way that made him look impossibly younger. "I thought maybe we could have coffee first. Just us. Just us." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. "Okay," she said softly. "Show me what you've been doing wrong." He moved to the machine with his usual precision, measuring coffee grounds with the same attention he probably gave to legal contracts. But there was a tension in his shoulders, a carefulness that had nothing to do with coffee and everything to do with her proximity. "I follow the manual exactly," he said, pressing buttons in sequence. "But it always tastes empty," she finished. He looked at her sharply. "How did you know?" "Because that's how you've been living." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Honest and raw, following manuals, checking boxes, doing everything right but feeling nothing. Asher went very still, his hand frozen over the coffee machine. "Heloisa, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to..." "No." His voice was quiet but firm. "You're right. Everything in my life has been..." He searched for the word. "Mechanical, safe, predictable. And now?" He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his grey eyes made her breath catch. "Now everything feels dangerous. Because of you. Because of Alexander. Because for the first time in my life, I want something I can't control." The confession hit her like a physical force. She moved closer, ostensibly to check his coffee setup, but really because the pull between them was becoming impossible to resist. "What do you want?" she whispered. "This." His hand gestured between them. "Whatever this is, I want to learn how to make coffee taste like home. I want to wake up and have somewhere to belong. I want—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "What else do you want, Asher?" "I want to touch you," he said, his voice barely audible. "I want to know what it feels like to hold someone who actually wants to be held, but I don't know how. I don't know anything about this." The vulnerability in his admission made her heart race. This powerful man who commanded courtrooms was terrified of the simple act of human connection. "Then let me teach you," she said, reaching for his hands. "Coffee first. Everything else, we'll figure out together." His hands were warm, larger than hers, with long fingers that trembled slightly at her touch. She guided them to the coffee grounds, showing him how to measure by feel rather than strict measurement. "It's not about being exact," she said, acutely aware of how close they were standing. "It's about paying attention to what feels right." "I've never trusted feelings before," he admitted. "What do you trust? Facts, evidence, things I can prove." She smiled, turning in his arms so her back was against his chest, his hands still covering hers as they worked. "Then let's start with facts. Fact 1, I'm here. Fact 2, you asked me to be here. Fact 3, what's fact 3? His breath was warm against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "You're not as alone as you think you are." For a moment they stood like that, her leaning back against his solid warmth, his arms encircling her as they prepared coffee together. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with trust. "Now the water," she murmured, guiding his hand to the kettle. "Not boiling, just before boiling, like anticipation." "Anticipation," he repeated, and something in his voice made her turn in his arms. They were face to face now, barely inches apart. His eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her feel naked, seen, known. "Heloisa," he said, her name a question and a prayer. "Yes? I think I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me." The words hit her like lightning. Not the confession itself. She'd felt the pull between them growing stronger every day, but the raw honesty with which he delivered it. "Why does it terrify you?" she asked, reaching up to touch his face. "Because I don't know how to love someone without destroying it. Because I don't know how to be vulnerable without being weak. Because—" his voice broke slightly. "Because what if you see who I really am and decide I'm not worth the effort?" Her heart shattered for this brilliant, broken man who thought love was something he had to earn. "Asher," she said firmly, "do you trust me?" "Yes." "Then trust this. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. And you, exactly as you are right now, scared and uncertain and trying so hard to be good, you are absolutely worth the effort." Before he could respond, before either of them could think too hard about what they were doing, she rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, a question rather than a demand. For a moment, he froze, and she wondered if she'd pushed too far, too fast. Then his arms tightened around her, and he kissed her back with the desperate intensity of a man who'd been drowning and suddenly found air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the coffee machine was still humming in the background, forgotten. "That," Asher said, his forehead resting against hers, "was better than any coffee I've ever had." She laughed, the sound bright and hopeful in the morning kitchen. "Just wait until you try the coffee I'm about to make you." "Heloisa." I think I'm ready to learn how to trust feelings." And as the morning sun streamed through the windows, warming the space where they stood wrapped in each other's arms, she knew that everything was about to change. The question was, were they brave enough to let it? Love has a way of making you forget that the world outside still exists until it comes crashing through your door. The video had been posted for 3 hours before Heloisa saw it. 3 hours of her life being dissected by strangers on the internet while she'd been lost in the bubble of Asher's arms, teaching him how to make French toast for Alexander's Saturday breakfast. "Mommy, why are you looking at your phone like that?" Alexander asked, syrup dripping from his fork as he paused mid-bite. Her hands were shaking. The caption read, "Karen can't control her autistic kid. Meltdown at Giuseppe's." The video, grainy but clear enough, showed Alexander's breakdown at the Italian restaurant 3 days ago when the fire alarm had unexpectedly gone off during their dinner. 15 seconds of her son in distress, her own panicked attempts to comfort him, and the judgmental stares of other diners, all packaged for viral consumption. "Heloisa?" Asher's voice came from behind her, warm with concern. "What's wrong?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The comments were already pouring in, each one a knife to her heart. This is why some people shouldn't have kids. Poor kid needs real help, not a mother who enables him. Autism isn't an excuse for bad parenting. Let me see. Asher moved to her side, his presence steady and grounding. She handed him the phone with trembling fingers. She watched his face change as he read, the tenderness from moments before hardening into something cold and sharp. This was the Asher Lorne who destroyed opposing counsel in courtrooms. "This is garbage," he said flatly. "Complete garbage created by people who have no understanding of—" "They're not wrong." The words tumbled out of her, broken and defeated. "Maybe I am a bad mother. Maybe I can't give him what he needs. Maybe—" "Stop." Asher set the phone down and gripped her shoulders gently but firmly. "Look at me, Eloisa. Look at me." She met his eyes, seeing fury there, not at her, but for her. "You are an extraordinary mother," he said with quiet intensity. "I've watched you with Alexander. I've seen how you anticipate his needs, how you create safety for him in a world that doesn't understand. Those people," he gestured at the phone with disgust, "they see 15 seconds of a moment and think they understand 5 years of devotion. But what if they're right? What if I'm holding him back? What if—" "Mommy," Alexander's small voice cut through her spiral. "Are you sad because of the bad people on the computer?" Her heart clenched. Even at 5, he was trying to take care of her emotional state instead of the other way around. "A little bit, baby," she admitted, wiping her eyes. Alexander climbed down from his chair and walked over to her with that serious expression he wore when processing complex emotions. "The bad people don't know about your hugs," he said simply. "They don't know that you learned my favorite songs, or that you make my food just right, or that you never get mad when I need to count things. They don't know about your love, so their words don't count." Asher sucked in a sharp breath. Even he was undone by the child's wisdom. "You're right," Eloisa whispered, kneeling down to Alexander's level. "You're absolutely right. Besides," Alexander continued with 5-year-old logic, "Mr. Asher likes us, and he's really smart, so we must be good people." Over Alexander's head, Asher's eyes met hers. Something passed between them, a recognition of how quickly their little bubble could be popped, how real the world outside remained. "I want to help," Asher said quietly. "I have lawyers who specialize in online harassment. I can have this video taken down, find out who posted it." "No." Eloisa stood, her voice stronger now. "Thank you, but no. Fighting this will only make it bigger. I learned a long time ago that you can't control what people say about you. You can only control how you respond to it. So what do you want to do?" She looked around the kitchen, at the French toast Asher had made with careful attention to Alexander's preferences, at the marble patterns visible through the doorway where her son found beauty, at the coffee cups from their morning lessons still sitting by the sink. "I want to focus on this," she said. "On us, on what's real. Let them have their 15 seconds of judgment. We have a lifetime of truth." Asher stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "Are you sure? Because I meant what I said. I can destroy them legally." The protective fury in his voice made her heart race. When was the last time someone had wanted to fight for her like this? "I'm sure," she said. "But thank you for wanting to protect us." "Always," he said simply, and she believed him. Alexander tugged on Asher's sweater. "Mr. Asher, can we go look at the marble patterns now? I want to show you the new story I found." "Of course," Asher said, but his eyes remained on Eloisa. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. The video would probably get worse before it got better. There would be more comments, more judgment, more strangers thinking they understood her life based on a moment of vulnerability. But as she watched Asher kneel beside Alexander on the marble floor, pointing out patterns and listening with the same attention he gave to million-dollar cases, she realized something important. She wasn't facing this alone anymore. For the first time in years, she had someone in her corner, someone who saw her struggles not as failures, but as evidence of how hard she was fighting, someone who looked at her son and saw not a burden, but a gift. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification from the video. She turned it face down without looking. "Mommy, come see," Alexander called. "Mr. Asher found a pattern that looks like a heart." She joined them on the floor, the three of them huddled together over the marble that had brought them all together. And as Asher pointed out the heart-shaped veining in the stone, she realized that maybe, just maybe, the cruel comments of strangers mattered less than the love growing in this unlikely space. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning more than just the marble. "Yes," Asher said, his eyes on her face. "It is." But even as the moment wrapped around them like a protective cocoon, Eloisa couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The world outside wouldn't stay quiet forever. And when it came knocking again, would what they were building together be strong enough to survive it? Trust, once broken, sounds different when it tries to rebuild itself, like glass being carefully pieced together, beautiful, but forever changed. Heloisa discovered the manila folder on Tuesday morning, tucked beneath a stack of legal briefs on Asher's desk. She'd only gone into his study to leave his breakfast, but her name written in black marker across the tab made her blood run cold. Grant, Heloisa, background investigation, confidential. Her hands trembled as she opened it, though she knew she shouldn't. Inside were photocopies of documents that painted her life in clinical, devastating detail, credit reports showing her mounting debt, medical records detailing Alexander's diagnosis, school incident reports, even a copy of the video from Giuseppe's restaurant with a timestamp showing it was downloaded 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, before they'd kissed, before he'd told her he was falling in love with her, before any of it. You weren't supposed to see that. Asher's voice from the doorway made her jump, the folder scattering papers across his pristine desk. He stood there in his running clothes, sweat still beading on his forehead, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. But I did see it, she said, her voice hollow. 2 weeks ago, Asher. You had me investigated 2 weeks ago. It's standard procedure. I investigate everyone who works for me. Everyone you work for or everyone you fall in love with. The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with a betrayal that cut deep. He flinched. It's not what you think. Then what is it? She gestured at the scattered papers. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you decided I wasn't trustworthy enough to tell you my own story. That's not... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. Sorry? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know about my student loans, my medical bills, the fact that I was fired from Meridian Restaurant for attitude problems when I stood up for another server. You know about every mistake I've ever made, every struggle I've faced, and you never once thought to ask me directly? I was scared, he admitted quietly. Of what? Of this. He gestured between them. Of wanting something so badly that I'd ignore red flags. Of being wrong about you and having my heart broken. Of being right about you and not deserving it. His honesty hit her like a physical blow, but the hurt was too fresh for it to soften the edges of her anger. So instead of trusting me, you decided to spy on me. It wasn't spying. What would you call it? Silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things they'd shared and all the things he'd already known before she'd chosen to share them. Where's Alexander? She asked suddenly, realizing the house was too quiet. Upstairs, playing with his dinosaur puzzle. He's fine. No, he's not fine. None of us are fine. She started gathering the papers, her movements sharp and precise. Because you know what the worst part is, Asher? It's not that you investigated me. It's that you let me believe you were learning to trust. I am learning to trust. No, you're not. You're learning to control. There's a difference. She slammed the folder shut. Trust means believing in someone without needing proof. Control means gathering all the evidence first, so you never have to be vulnerable. The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. Asher's face went pale, then flushed with something that might have been anger or shame. You think this is about control, isn't it? The marble patterns Alexander loves so much. You counted every single one before you bought this house, didn't you? You know exactly how many steps it takes to get from your bedroom to the kitchen. You have backup plans for your backup plans. And when something unexpected happened, when you started to feel something real, you couldn't handle not knowing everything about it. Each word hit its mark, and she watched him crumble a little more with each truth. You're not wrong, he said finally. I do need to know, I do need to control, because the alternative... What? What's the alternative, Asher? Chaos, he whispered. Pain. Losing everything that matters because I wasn't prepared. The broken way he said it made her chest ache, but she couldn't let sympathy override the principle at stake. But that's what love is, she said softly. It's chaos. It's not knowing. It's choosing to trust someone even when you can't control the outcome. I don't know how to do that. Then maybe you're not ready for this. For us. The words tasted like ashes in her mouth, but they needed to be said. She walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. The woman in that file, the one with the debt and the struggles and the attitude problems, she's real, but she's not complete. You missed the parts that don't show up on background checks. You missed the woman who sings to her son when he can't sleep, who saves every penny for his therapy, who makes magic out of simple ingredients because love is the only seasoning that really matters. Heloisa, please. I need time to think, she said, Alexander and I won't be coming tomorrow. She made it to the kitchen before the tears started. Alexander found her there 5 minutes later, sitting at the island with her head in her hands. "Mommy, are you sad about the marble man again?" She looked up at her son, her beautiful, perceptive son, who saw hearts in stone patterns and hope in broken places. "A little bit, baby. Did he forget how to count good things?" Out of the mouths of babes. "Yeah, I think he did." Alexander climbed onto the stool beside her, his small hand patting her arm with the same gentleness she'd used to comfort him through 1,000 difficult moments. "Maybe we should teach him again," he said. "Sometimes people need lots of practice before they remember how to be happy." "Maybe," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if some lessons could be taught twice. As they left the mansion that morning, Alexander waved goodbye to the marble patterns in the foyer. But Heloisa didn't look back. Some foundations, once cracked, took more than love to repair. They took time, they took work, and most of all, they took trust. Real trust, the kind that couldn't be built from files and investigations. The question was Asher capable of learning that kind of trust, or would his need for control always stand between them and the love they might have had? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you've been living your life afraid. Asher sat in Dr. Camden Rivera's office for the 3rd time in 2 weeks, staring at the same motivational poster he'd been avoiding since his first session. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway. "You've been quiet today," Dr. Rivera observed, her pen poised over her notepad but not writing. "Usually by now you've given me a detailed analysis of what you think is wrong and a 5-point plan to fix it." "I don't have a plan this time," Asher admitted, his voice hoarse from days of barely speaking. "I've tried everything I know how to do, and I still lost them." "Tell me what you've tried." "I had the video taken down. Legally, quietly, no drama. I set up a college fund for Alexander. I researched the best autism specialists in the country and arranged consultations. I even—" He stopped, embarrassed. "Even what?" "I had my assistant create a presentation. 47 slides detailing all the ways I could make their lives better. Financial security, educational opportunities, healthcare, everything measurable and concrete." Dr. Rivera set down her pen entirely. "And how did that feel when you finished it?" "Empty. Like I was trying to buy something that can't be purchased." "What can't be purchased, Asher?" "Trust." The word came out like a confession. "Forgiveness. Love that isn't conditional on what I can provide." "And what does that realization tell you?" He was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched in his lap. Outside the office window, he could see people walking their dogs, couples holding hands, children running ahead of their parents, all the messy, uncontrollable chaos of life that he'd spent decades avoiding. "That I've been doing it wrong," he said finally. "All of it. I thought love was about proving worth, about being valuable enough to keep. But Heloisa—" He paused, her name still causing that familiar ache in his chest. "She didn't care about my money or my house or my connections. She cared about whether I could learn to trust without proof. And could you? No. When it mattered most, I chose fear over faith." He looked directly at Dr. Rivera for the first time that session. "How do I fix that?" "You start by understanding why you're afraid in the first place. We've touched on your childhood, but we haven't really explored—" "My mother left when I was 8, he said abruptly. "Just disappeared one day. No note, no explanation. My father told me it was because I wasn't good enough to make her want to stay." Dr. Rivera's expression softened. "That's a terrible thing to tell a child." He was probably right. I was difficult, too quiet, too serious, too much work. And when she left, I decided I'd never give anyone the chance to leave again. I'd know everything, control everything, prove my worth before anyone could find me lacking. But that's not what happened with Heloisa and Alexander, is it? No, his voice cracked. They saw all my flaws, my rigidity, my fear, my complete inability to be spontaneous. And they stayed anyway. Alexander hugged me. Heloisa taught me how to make coffee taste like love. And instead of trusting that gift, I tried to turn them into data points I could analyze. What would it look like to trust without proof? Asher considered this, thinking about Alexander's easy affection, about Heloisa's patient teaching, about the way they'd made space for him in their world, without asking for a background check in return. Terrifying, he said honestly, but also liberating. Tell me about the liberation. When I was with them, really with them, not planning or analyzing or preparing, I felt peaceful, like I could just exist without having to justify my existence. He paused, Is it too late to learn that? To be that person? What do you think? I think, he took a deep breath, I think I want to try. Not because I have a plan or because I know it will work, but because some things are worth the risk of failing. Dr. Rivera smiled. That sounds like progress. Later that evening, Asher stood outside Heloise's apartment building, holding nothing but a simple envelope. No presentations, no grand gestures, no detailed proposals, just a letter written in his own handwriting on plain paper. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes, working up the courage to ring the buzzer. Through the window, he could see Alexander's silhouette moving around the small living room, probably arranging his toys in the careful patterns that brought him comfort. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. The Williamson contract needs your review. It's urgent. For the first time in his professional life, Asher turned off his phone without responding. Finally, he pressed the buzzer. Hello? Heloise's voice was cautious. It's me, he said simply. A long pause. Then, Asher, I told you I needed time. I know. I'm not here to rush you or convince you or present evidence for why you should forgive me. I'm here to give you something, and then I'll leave. You can read it or throw it away, whatever feels right. Another pause. Alexander's asleep. I understand. Come up, but just for a minute. When she opened the door, the sight of her hit him like a physical blow. She looked tired, her usually bright eyes dimmed with the exhaustion of carrying too much alone. But she was still beautiful, more beautiful somehow for the realness of her struggles. You look terrible, she said, which was probably true. He hadn't been sleeping. I've been thinking, he said, holding out the envelope. About what you said. About trust and control and learning to count good things. She took the envelope but didn't open it. What is this? An apology. A real one. And a promise I'm not sure I can keep, but I want to try. Asher, I don't want you to say anything right now, he said quickly. I just want you to know that I'm learning. Slowly, badly, with a lot of help. But I'm learning. And whether you decide to give us another chance or not, I'll keep learning. Because you and Alexander taught me something I'd forgotten. What's that? That some things are worth more than safety. Some things are worth the risk of being hurt. He stepped back toward the elevator. Read the letter when you're ready, or don't. But know that for the first time in my life, I'm choosing trust over control. As the elevator doors closed between them, Asher caught a glimpse of Heloisa looking down at the envelope in her hands. He'd done all he could do. The rest was up to her. And for the first time in his adult life, that uncertainty didn't terrify him. It gave him hope. There are words that change everything, and others that heal everything. Sometimes they're the same words, written at exactly the right moment. Heloisa sat on her small couch for 2 hours, the unopened envelope on her coffee table like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Alexander had woken up once asking for water, and mentioning that he'd dreamed about the marble man looking sad, before settling back into sleep. Even unconscious, her son seemed tuned into the emotional currents around him. Finally, as the digital clock turned to 11:47 p.m., she opened the envelope. The letter was written on simple white paper in Asher's precise handwriting, but there were places where the ink had smudged, as if water had dropped onto the page while he wrote. Dear Heloisa, I've started this letter 17 times. I keep trying to find the perfect words, the exact combination that will make you understand how sorry I am and how much you both mean to me. But perfection is part of the problem, isn't it? I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect, to have all the answers, to control every variable, and in doing so, I nearly lost the most perfect thing that ever happened to me. You, Alexander, us. I want to tell you why I had you investigated, but I realize now that the why doesn't matter as much as the what it cost us, what it revealed about my inability to trust, what it said about how I view love as something to be earned rather than freely given. But I'll tell you anyway because you deserve honesty even when it makes me look terrible. My mother left when I was 8 years old. One morning she was there making breakfast, humming while she poured orange juice, and by afternoon she was gone. My father told me it was my fault, that I was too quiet, too difficult, too much work. He said if I'd been a better son, maybe she would have wanted to stay. I believed him. For 26 years I've believed that love is conditional on performance, that if I could just be good enough, successful enough, valuable enough, maybe someone would choose to stay. But performance requires knowing the script, and I couldn't trust that you would love the real me, messy, afraid, completely inexperienced at being human with another person. So I tried to know everything about you first. I told myself I was being careful, protecting myself, making an informed decision, but really I was trying to find reasons to walk away before you could. What I found instead was a woman who works 3 jobs to give her son the best life possible. A woman who turns simple ingredients into love made edible. A woman who sees the scared little boy in a successful lawyer and doesn't run away. What I found was someone worth risking everything for. I'm in therapy now, not because I think it will win you back, though I hope it might, but because Alexander was right when he said I'd forgotten how to count good things. I want to remember. I want to learn how to trust without proof, how to love without guarantees, how to be vulnerable without feeling like I'm dying. I want to learn how to be the man you and Alexander deserve. I know I hurt you. I know I broke something precious, and I can't fix it with money or connections or even sincere apologies. Trust, once broken, has to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, with actions instead of words. But if you're willing, if there's any chance you could see your way to giving me another opportunity, I want to try. Not the old way, where I control everything, but a new way, your way, Alexander's way, the way that trusts in marble patterns and morning coffee and 5-year-old wisdom about counting good things. I love you, Heloisa. I love the way you sing while you cook, the way you protect your son's gentleness while teaching him strength, the way you saw something worth saving in a man who had forgotten how to hope. I love Alexander's pure heart and endless curiosity, and the way he makes me want to be better just by believing I already am. I love us, this unexpected family we accidentally created in the spaces between silence and trust. If you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life learning how to love you both the way you deserve. Not perfectly. I'm finally understanding that perfection isn't the goal, but truly, honestly, with everything I have, I'll wait for as long as you need. And if you decide I'm not worth the risk, I'll respect that too. But I'll keep working on myself either way, because you taught me that some changes aren't about getting what you want. They're about becoming who you're meant to be. Thank you for showing me what love looks like when it's real. Always yours, if you'll have me. Asher P.S. Alexander left his favorite toy car at the house, the red one that doesn't like being touched by the blue one. I've been keeping it safe on my desk, next to the photo of you both that I took the morning we made pancakes together, just in case. Heloisa read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face by the end of the first reading, her heart cracking open during the second. This wasn't the controlled, analytical Asher she'd known. This was raw, honest, broken, and beautiful. She thought about the scared 8-year-old boy who'd been told his mother's leaving was his fault. She thought about the man who'd spent decades building walls so high he'd forgotten there was a world beyond them. She thought about the gentle way he'd held Alexander, the careful way he'd learned to make coffee, the wonder in his eyes when he'd realized someone could love him without conditions. And she thought about what Alexander had said. Sometimes people need lots of practice before they remember how to be happy. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about erasing the hurt. Maybe it was about choosing to believe in someone's capacity to grow. Maybe love wasn't about finding someone perfect. Maybe it was about finding someone willing to become better. Her phone was in her hand before she'd consciously decided to pick it up. Her fingers found his number in her contacts, the one she'd never deleted despite everything. It rang once, twice. Heloisa. His voice was rough with sleep and hope and fear. I read your letter, she said softly. And? She closed her eyes, thinking of marble patterns and morning coffee, and the way her son had worried about a lonely man with sad eyes. And I think, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, that some foundations can be rebuilt, if both people are willing to do the work. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete, she wondered if the call had dropped. Asher, I'm here, he whispered, and she could hear the tears in his voice. I'm here, and I'm willing. More than willing, I'm grateful. There are conditions, she said, because there had to be boundaries. There had to be trust, rebuilt step by step. Whatever you need. No more investigations, no more trying to control the outcome. If you want to know something about me or Alexander, you ask. If you're scared, you tell me. If you don't understand something, you say so. Deal? Deal. And therapy continues, for both of us, separately and together. This kind of love, the real kind, it takes work. I wouldn't have it any other way. Heloisa smiled, feeling something she'd thought was broken beginning to heal. Alexander's been asking about his red car, she said. It's waiting for him, just like I've been waiting for you. Then maybe, she said, her voice soft with new possibility, it's time for all of us to come home. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with a 5-year-old boy reclaiming his favorite toy car and a man finally learning that home isn't a place, it's the people who choose to stay. Alexander spotted his red car the moment they walked through the front door, but instead of running to it immediately, he stopped and looked up at Asher with those impossibly wise eyes. "Did you take good care of him?" he asked seriously. "I kept him right on my desk," Asher replied, crouching down to Alexander's level. "I talked to him sometimes, told him you were coming back soon." "What did you tell him?" "That his boy missed him, and that his boy's mom was teaching a grown-up how to be brave." Alexander nodded solemnly, then surprised them both by stepping forward and wrapping his arms around Asher's neck. "I missed you too, Mr. Asher. The marble patterns at home aren't as good as yours." Over Alexander's head, Asher's eyes met Heloise's, and she saw everything in that look: gratitude, wonder, and a love so deep it took her breath away. "I missed you both more than I knew how to say," Asher whispered into Alexander's hair. The past month had been careful and intentional. Phone calls that started awkward and grew comfortable. Therapy sessions where Heloisa learned about Asher's childhood and he learned about her fears of not being enough. Supervised visits where Alexander slowly rebuilt his trust with the marble man who'd learned to ask questions instead of assuming answers. But this felt like the real beginning. "Can we make pancakes?" Alexander asked, pulling back to look at Asher's face. "The kind that taste like love. I think your mom is the expert on those," Asher said, standing and extending his hand to Heloisa. "Would you teach us both?" His palm was warm, slightly damp with nervous sweat, and completely honest. No hiding, no performance, just a man asking for help with something that mattered. "I'd love to," she said, interlacing their fingers. In the kitchen, they moved around each other with the careful choreography of people learning to share space again. Alexander arranged ingredients by color, while Heloisa showed Asher how to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl. "You're getting better at this," she observed, as he successfully separated his third egg. "I've been practicing," he admitted. "YouTube videos. I wanted to be able to help this time instead of just watching." "You were always helping," she said softly. "You just didn't realize it." "How?" "By trying. By caring enough to be bad at something in front of us. By letting Alexander teach you about marble patterns and letting me teach you about coffee. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to learn." Alexander looked up from his ingredient arrangement. "Are you two going to get married?" The question hit the kitchen like a gentle bomb. Heloisa nearly dropped her whisk, and Asher went completely still. "Alexander," she started, "that's not really... I mean, you love each other, right?" Alexander continued with 5-year-old logic. "And we're like a family now. Families live together and take care of each other and make pancakes on Saturday mornings." Asher cleared his throat. "What would you think about that, Alexander? If your mom and I got married someday, would I still be able to count the marble patterns? Every day if you want to. And would you still learn how to make food that tastes like hugs?" "I'd keep learning for the rest of my life." Alexander nodded seriously. "Then I think it's a good idea. But you have to ask Mom properly, with flowers and a speech about feelings." Heloisa laughed, the sound bright and full of joy. "Alexander Grant, you are too smart for your own good." "I know," he said matter-of-factly, "but smart is good for keeping families together." They ate their pancakes at the kitchen island, the morning sun streaming through the windows and catching the gold flecks in Asher's eyes. Alexander chatted about school, about his friend Marcus, who'd started collecting rocks instead of bottle caps, about how he wanted to show the class pictures of the marble patterns because art is everywhere if you know how to look. "Speaking of looking," Asher said, setting down his fork with the careful precision that was just part of who he was, "I have something to show you both." He led them to the study, where his massive mahogany desk had been transformed. Gone were the neat stacks of legal briefs and the intimidating computer setup. Instead, the desk was covered with children's books, art supplies, and a large magnifying glass next to a collection of interesting rocks. "I thought," Asher said, his voice uncertain, "maybe this could be Alexander's space too, for homework or looking at patterns or just being here." Alexander's eyes went wide. "My own desk? In your office?" "Our office," Asher corrected gently, "if you want it to be." Alexander ran to the desk, running his hands over the art supplies with the same reverence he'd shown the dinosaur puzzle. "This is the best surprise ever, even better than the car. And this," Asher said, turning to Heloisa, "is for you." He handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with 3 small charms, a tiny whisk, a marble, and a heart. "The whisk for the way you turn ingredients into love," he explained, his voice soft. "The marble for the patterns that brought us together, and the heart for," he swallowed hard, "for how you taught me that mine still works." Heloisa felt tears prick her eyes as he fastened the bracelet around her wrist with hands that barely trembled. "Asher," she whispered. "I know this is all new," he said quickly. "I know we're still learning how to be us, but I want you to know that this is my promise. Not perfect love, but real love. Not controlled love, but chosen love. Every day for as long as you'll have me." She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, soft and sure and full of all the words she couldn't find. When they broke apart, Alexander was watching them with a satisfied smile. "Now that," he said, "looked like a family." Later that evening, as Alexander played quietly with his red car on the marble patterns, Heloisa and Asher sat together on the couch, her feet in his lap, both of them watching the most beautiful chaos they'd ever seen. "Are you happy?" she asked. "I'm terrified," he said honestly. "I'm completely, utterly terrified that I'll mess this up somehow." "That's not what I asked." He considered this, looking around the room, at Alexander humming softly as he traced patterns in the stone, at the coffee cups from their morning lesson still sitting on the table, at the woman whose love had taught him that safety wasn't the absence of fear, but the presence of something worth fighting for. "Yes," he said finally, "I'm happy. For the first time in my life, I'm genuinely, completely, heart-racingly happy." "Good," she said, settling deeper into his side, "because this is just the beginning." Outside, the sun was setting over Pacific Heights, painting the marble floors in shades of gold and rose. And inside, three people who'd found each other against all odds were learning that sometimes the most beautiful patterns aren't planned. They're discovered, one small choice at a time. "Mommy, Mr. Asher," Alexander called from the floor. "Come see what I found. The marble has a pattern that looks like infinity. Do you know what that means?" Asher and Heloisa exchanged a look, then joined Alexander on the floor, the three of them tracing endless loops in Italian stone. "It means forever," Alexander said with the wisdom of someone who understood that the best things in life weren't measured in time, but in love. "Forever," Asher repeated, his arm around Heloisa, his free hand helping Alexander trace the pattern, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, forever didn't sound scary. It sounded like home. 2 years later, some stories end with grand declarations, but the most beautiful ones end with ordinary Tuesday mornings that feel extraordinary because of the love that fills them. Heloisa woke to the sound of muffled laughter coming from downstairs, a sound that still made her heart skip, even after 2 years of marriage and mornings that began with chaos instead of silence. She found them in the kitchen, Asher, still in his pajamas and reading glasses, helping 7-year-old Alexander measure flour for pancakes, while simultaneously explaining why the ratio mattered for optimal fluffiness. Alexander, who now wore his hair longer and had discovered the joy of asking but why about everything, was listening with the intense concentration he'd once reserved for marble patterns. "Good morning, my loves," she said, padding barefoot across the kitchen to kiss Asher's cheek and ruffle Alexander's hair. "Mommy," Alexander beamed, "Dad's teaching me about gluten development. Did you know that when you mix flour and water, tiny chains form that make bubbles possible?" "Dad." The word still made Asher's face light up like Christmas morning, even though Alexander had been using it naturally for over a year now, ever since the adoption papers were finalized and Asher had cried harder than anyone at the courthouse ceremony. "I did know that," Heloisa said, settling onto a stool to watch her husband and son work together. "Your dad is very smart about food science." "Among other things," Asher said, catching her eye with that small smile that was hers alone. "Though I'm still learning about the emotional science of cooking." The kitchen had changed since those first tentative mornings. Alexander's artwork covered the refrigerator, and his collection of interesting rocks lined the windowsill. Asher's once pristine marble counters bore the gentle scars of daily family life, ring stains from coffee mugs, flour fingerprints, the small burn mark from the time Alexander had tried to surprise them with breakfast in bed and had learned why 7-year-olds shouldn't operate toasters unsupervised. "Mrs. Chen said I can do my geology presentation on our marble patterns," Alexander announced, flipping a pancake with the careful precision he'd inherited from both his parents. "She said it's unusual for a kid my age to understand geological formation, but I told her I had good teachers." Heloisa and Asher exchanged a look of quiet pride. Alexander had thrived in the past 2 years. His new school specialized in gifted children with learning differences, and his confidence had bloomed like a flower finally getting enough sunlight. Speaking of which, Asher said, setting a plate of perfectly golden pancakes in front of Heloisa. Dr. Rivera called yesterday. She wanted to know if we'd be interested in speaking to other families about learning to build trust after difficult beginnings. What did you tell her? That I'd talk to my wife about it. The word wife still came out with a touch of wonder, as if Asher couldn't quite believe his luck. Alexander looked up from his pancakes, syrup sticky on his chin. Are you going to help other families learn how to count good things? Maybe, Heloisa said. Would you like that? I think it's important, Alexander said, with 7-year-old solemnity. Some people forget that families can look different and still be perfect, like how marble patterns are all different, but they're all beautiful. As if summoned by his words, their attention was drawn to the foyer, where the morning light was hitting the marble floors in a way that made the patterns seem to dance. The same patterns where Alexander had first shown Asher how to see stories in stone, where trust had been built one traced line at a time. You know what I love about those patterns? Asher said, following their gaze. What? Alexander asked. They're not planned. The marble formed over millions of years through heat and pressure and time, and no two pieces are ever exactly the same, but somehow they all fit together perfectly. Like families? Alexander said wisely. Like families, Asher agreed, reaching over to squeeze Heloisa's hand. After breakfast, they walked Alexander to the school bus stop, a routine that Asher had insisted on from the very beginning, despite having no experience with school-age children and initially fumbling through conversations about lunch money and permission slips. Have a good day, kiddo, Asher said, giving Alexander the careful hug that had evolved from tentative pats to full contact affection over the past 2 years. Dad? Alexander paused with one foot on the bus steps. Yeah? Tonight, can we work on the puzzle? The 3D solar system one? Absolutely. Your mum promised to make her special hot chocolate. Alexander grinned and bounded up the bus steps, waving from his usual window seat as the bus pulled away. Walking back to the house, Heloisa slipped her hand into Asher's, noting how natural the gesture had become. This man who'd once been afraid to touch anyone now reached for her hand without thinking, anchored himself to her presence, like she was his true north. Penny for your thoughts, she said. I was thinking about patterns, he said, about how 2 years ago I thought love was about finding someone who fit into my existing life, but really, it's about creating something entirely new together. Any regrets? He stopped walking and turned to face her, his grey eyes serious. About giving up my old life, about learning to trust, about becoming a husband and father overnight. He paused, pretending to consider. Only one, her heart stuttered. What? I regret that it took me 34 years to find you. His smile was soft, real, completely unguarded. Because every day before you feels like wasted time. Asher Lawn, she said, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him in the middle of their quiet neighborhood street. You are going to make me cry on a Tuesday morning. Sorry, he said, not sounding sorry at all. I'm still learning how to express feelings without overwhelming people. Don't you dare learn to tone it down, she laughed. I like my husband overwhelming. As they reached their front door, Asher paused with his key in the lock. I have something to tell you, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her attention sharpen. Good something or concerning something? Good something. Great something, actually. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said last month, about wanting to expand our family. Heloisa's heart started racing. They'd been talking about it, carefully, tentatively, but Asher's fears about being a good father had made the conversations theoretical rather than practical. And I called the adoption agency yesterday. We have an appointment next week to discuss becoming foster parents. The words hit her like sunshine after rain. Really? Really? Because Alexander was right. Families can look different and still be perfect. And if there's another child out there who needs what we can give, he shrugged, but his eyes were bright with possibility. I want to try. I want to trust that we're strong enough to help someone else find their way home. Heloisa threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the joy and pride and overwhelming love she felt for this man who'd learned to see beyond his fears. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love your brave heart, and your careful hands, and your willingness to keep growing. I love you too, he said, more than marble patterns and morning coffee and all the controlled predictability I used to think I needed. As they walked into their house, past the marble patterns that had started everything, through the kitchen where they'd learned to trust each other, up the stairs where Alexander's laughter still echoed, Heloisa marveled at how completely their lives had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been a single mother desperate for stability, taking a job with a man who seemed cold and unreachable. Now she was a wife and partner, and possibly soon-to-be foster mother, married to someone who made her coffee every morning and read bedtime stories with different voices for each character and still looked at her like she was magic. 2 years ago, Asher had been a man so afraid of vulnerability that he'd lived like a ghost in his own life. Now he coached Alexander's weekend soccer team, attended school plays with enthusiastic applause, and had learned that love multiplied rather than divided when you opened your heart wider. That evening, as promised, they worked on Alexander's solar system puzzle while sipping Heloisa's famous hot chocolate. Alexander chatted about planets and distances, while Asher helped him fit the pieces together with infinite patience. "Mom, Dad," Alexander said suddenly, looking up from Jupiter's rings, "I'm really glad you found each other." "Us too, sweetheart," Heloisa said. "Even if it took a while," Asher added, ruffling Alexander's hair. "Sometimes the best things are worth waiting for." As bedtime approached, and they tucked Alexander in with his usual ritual of counting good things from the day, Heloisa stood in the doorway, watching Asher listen to their son's sleepy observations about friendship and homework and the way shadows looked like dragons on the ceiling. "5 good things," Alexander mumbled into his pillow. "New rocks for my collection, pancakes with Dad, the bus driver remembered my name, Mom sang the dinosaur song, and..." He yawned hugely. "And we're all still here together. All still here together," Asher agreed softly, pressing a kiss to Alexander's forehead. "Sweet dreams, kiddo." Later, curled up in bed with Asher's arm around her, and the sound of Alexander's peaceful breathing down the hall, Heloisa thought about patterns, not just in marble but in life. How sometimes the most beautiful designs emerged from pressure and time and the courage to trust in something bigger than yourself. "What are you thinking about?" Asher murmured into her hair. "Forever," she said, "and how it doesn't feel scary anymore." "No," he agreed, his voice drowsy with contentment. "It feels like coming home." And as they drifted off to sleep in the house, where marble patterns told stories of endurance and love, where morning coffee tasted like promises kept, and evening laughter echoed off walls that had learned to hold joy, they knew that some foundations, once rebuilt with trust and patience and the willingness to believe in second chances, could weather any storm. The patterns of their life together stretched ahead of them, unmapped but unafraid, as infinite and beautiful as the stone beneath their feet. What did you learn from Asher and Heloisa's story? Have you ever had to choose between safety and love? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.